Hey everybody, it's Emily at ARG Schooling, and today I want to give you some nonfiction recommendations. It's November, and everyone's reading nonfiction because Nonfiction November, so I thought I would share some of my favorite nonfiction titles and maybe give you some ideas of what you might pick up this month for Nonfiction November. So just jumping right in with one of my favorites. This is The Indifferent Stars Above, The Harrowing Saga of the Donner Party by Daniel James Brown. This is the story of the Donner Party, and it starts out with him following just this one woman who was in this group and tracing her story as to how she ended up there. And it's told in a really interesting way in that he really pulls you into this story and he describes everything. It's gorgeous. Like, the writing is really literary and you can feel like you're a part of this group and you can kind of see how something like this would have even happened. And he does a really good job too of explaining why this might have happened, what actually was going on here for them to go from these just, regular run-of-the-mill traveling people to devolving into eating their dead. So it was done really well. It's really interesting. I feel like I learned a lot reading this, not just about the Donner Party, but about the human experience, what we will do to survive, the lengths we go to survive, and why I would never want to be out in the cold like that. So this is phenomenal writing though. I absolutely love this book. If you're on a morbid kick, like I am, you might want to pick up Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory by Caitlin Doughty. Caitlin Doughty's books are so interesting, and I would highly recommend, if you're going to read this, to get the audiobook because she narrates it herself and she has a great narrative voice. So it's really, really interesting to listen to. This is a story of how she came to work in the death industry and what brought her to working in a crematorium and the way she thinks and views death. And it's really morbid because she's morbid, but it's also really, really beautiful to read. I love memoirs about weird, interesting people. And that is what this is. This is her memoir about how she used her fascination with death to get a job working in a crematory and how that led to what she does now, talking about the good death and finding ways to help people come to terms with the ideas of death. Last morbid book I'm going to show you is Stiff, The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers. This is by Mary Roach, and I'm reading this right now with my daughter, who is 15, and it's so fun. I've already read this in its entirety, and now I'm reading it along with her, and I'm loving the reread. This is a book about what happens to bodies that are donated for science. So if you've ever thought about well, maybe I'll donate my body after I die, but I wonder what will happen, read this book. It goes through so many different scenarios. It talks about the history of people studying anatomy with human cadavers and how it used to be considered a punishment or a bad thing that could happen to you, to how we look at it now and how science has evolved because of the use of human remains and human cadavers. And it's so interesting, but it's also written in a really kind of fun and almost whimsical way. The way she talks about things, the way she explains them is kind of fun. So if you've ever wondered what happens if I donate my body to science, read Stiff. Okay, just kidding. This last one is a little bit morbid, but not in the same way as the other three books I just talked about were. And that is Survivor Cafe, The Legacy of Trauma and the Labyrinth of Memory by Elizabeth Rossner. I read this a few years ago, and it really stuck with me. This is a book about talking to survivors of the Holocaust and talking about how the legacy of that affected the next generation and the generation after that as well. And really it's about generational trauma and how something so profoundly horrific can affect generations that come after, and like the legacy of that trauma and what happens because of it. I found this book fascinating. It's a topic that I think about more than probably the normal person should, but it's probably one of the best books I've read that explains generational trauma. Next, I want to talk about Wake, The Hidden History of Women-Led Slave Revolts by Rebecca Hall. I read this, I think, a year or two ago. And again, another book that's really stuck with me. This is a graphic novel. It's all in black and white. This book is part memoir and part like history, because the author is writing about the history of these women-led slave revolts, but she's also writing about her journey through researching this book and the things that happened to her as she was trying to learn more. So this is like 2 books in one, because it's a memoir of her researching, but it's also the story about these amazing women who were able to revolt and fight back. I love things like this, where you get like the person who's writing telling the story of writing the book while you're also reading the book. I think Mouse does this as well. Art Spiegelman's Mouse, which I would also recommend here. But that is the kind of thing, like if you know of other books like that, I would love to hear about it, because I absolutely love when an author does that. Okay, the rest of these are fun, I promise. Like these are more silly and interesting, but like in a fun sort of way. I want to throw a middle grade book in here because middle grade kids should be able to read interesting nonfiction too. And so I want to talk about The Mona Lisa Vanishes, A Legendary Painter, A Shocking Heist, and the Birth of Global Celebrity by Nicholas Day. I read this last year with my daughter, and we both had a really great time with it. This is a story about Leonardo da Vinci. You're getting a lot of story about his life, but it's also a story about this heist and what happened because of it. So you're learning not just about art history, but also about like detective work and like how that changed over the course of history, because the way they explain a lot of stuff here is about how like they would have an idea of what happened and then try to like fit all the pieces into that idea. So they were like basing a lot of their information on incorrect ideas, because surely anyone brilliant enough to steal a piece of art like this must fit this specific mold when actually it was over here somewhere. So like it was really, really interesting to read. I had such a fun time with this book. I learned so much about Leonardo da Vinci, about the way we view art, the way detective work has changed over time, the way something as mundane as a piece of art that no one had really ever heard of became the celebrity, and now everybody knows about the Mona Lisa because of this. So I think that's really interesting. Okay, these next 2 books are both in Build Your Library's Level 11. And so I read them while I was working on that update. I want to start with Says Who, A Kinder, Funner Usage Guide for Everyone Who Cares About Words by Anne Curzan. If you've ever thought that you were a grammar snob, or that you're just really interested in how language evolves, this is for you. This is a book about like exactly that, about how language evolves over time, and how whenever we think someone's usage is incorrect, we should take a step back and think about like, well, maybe it isn't actually incorrect. Maybe it's just evolving. Maybe we're changing how a word is used over time. Maybe that word used to be this, but now it is becoming this. You know what I mean? So this is like a really great book for high schoolers, I think, but also for anybody who is interested in learning more about words and grammar and just how language evolves. I want to recommend The Dictionary People. This is The Unsung Heroes Who Created the Oxford Dictionary by Sarah Ogilvie. I absolutely loved this book so much. I wish I could take part in a project like this. This is all about how the Oxford English Dictionary was created. And it was like this amazing like group project, this collaboration with hundreds and hundreds of people, all spread out across the globe, all contributing words to this project. So like the way I wanted to be a part of this as I was reading it, I was like, oh, I wish we could do this now. I would have so much fun. Researching words, just it sounds amazing. And so you're reading about all these different people who were contributing to the dictionary, and it goes through alphabetical order. So like K is for kleptomaniac, I is for inventors, O is for outsiders. So you're learning about these, sometimes a single person, sometimes a group of people, sometimes just like women or, you know, different groups of people who were helping to contribute to creating this dictionary. And I found it absolutely riveting. The last book I want to recommend today is kind of a fun off-the-wall one. This is 101 Horror Books to Read Before You're Murdered by Sadie Hartman. I love this book. I want to say this, I want to say it got me back into horror, but that's not entirely true because I've always been into horror. But this book definitely helped me to like stretch out and find some new things. Like I love reading things like this. This is just a gorgeous book to flip through, but the way she writes about books makes everything sound amazing. Like she has such a gift for talking about a book that maybe she didn't love, but she wants it to find its audience. So she helps like explain it in a way that makes every book she talks about sound great. And like some of the books that I picked up because of this book maybe weren't my favorite, but some of them absolutely were. So I love that Sadie Hartman has created this resource. I go to her for every like horror recommendation I can because I feel like she really does know how to explain what a book is about in a way that doesn't give anything really away, but still makes you really intrigued. So if you've ever wanted to get more into horror, this is a great book to check out. So I hope I've given you some great recommendations today for some nonfiction to read this month. Let me know down below in the comments what is one of your favorite nonfiction recommendations. I would love to hear it. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Happy reading. Bye!